Hey, welcome to Father in Our Future. I'm Anthony Vandegrift. I'm not the perfect dad, but every day, just like you, I am trying to be better. We are continuing our series on having the conversations with our children about sex. And I know that's uncomfortable at first, but today might be that much more uncomfortable because we're going to talk about what I believe to be an inevitable part of that conversation, and that is pornography. Now, I hope and pray that my kids are never exposed to it. But in the world in which we live, I almost feel like it is inescapable, that at some point they will get exposed. At some point there will be questions, and I don't want to wait around for that. I want to prepare myself and be ready in advance. So to help me with this and to help you with this, I am joined by my friend, Pastor Hadley Baker, who himself was an addict and overcame his addiction to pornography and wrote about it in his memoir, No Longer a Slave. Today he's joining me to help us understand how we can have this conversation with our kids, how we can prepare ourselves to have this conversation with our kids, and how we can help our kids be comfortable enough to come to us to have this conversation. This is not a discussion that is anecdotal, that just deals with the symptoms. Today, we're getting to the root of how we can actually help our children when it comes to the topic of pornography. I just want to take a moment and say thank you. Thank you for listening to Fathering Our Future. I appreciate it personally, but I also love the fact that you care about being the dad your children need you to be, and so you tune into the podcast. But while I have you, I want to ask you something. I would like you to consider becoming a monthly supporter of Fathering Our Future. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe it's just $5 a month. For you, that's a cup of coffee. But for another dad, that's a resource, a benefit, or a blessing. So ask yourself if you're able to do that and then respond. Again, it can be as small as $5 a month. It doesn't have to be a lot, but I'm done. I'm not going to push the envelope. There's a link at the bottom of the description. You can click that and you can go to the support page and then you can make your contribution there. Again, thank you. I'm super excited to let you know about my most recent project, a devotional for dads called Following Our Father. As Christian dads, we have no better example than our Father in heaven on how to be a dad. As a father reading the scriptures, I cannot help but see how he truly is our Father. So in this devotional, I go through 30 qualities and attributes of God. You can take it one day at a time and knock it out in a month, or you can take the time that you need to absorb who our Father is so that you can be the dad that you're called to be and be the dad that your children need you to be. This is available to you. You can check the description to find the link to get your copy. You can even get a copy for someone else. But this is a resource for you that will bless you. It will impact you as a father, and it will impact your home. So get your copy of Following Our Father. Get it today. Well, Hadley, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being with me again.
Excited to be back, man. Thank you for the invite.
Yep, I am really looking forward to our conversation. We're talking about the most comfortable topic for dads in general and having the conversation about sex, and probably the most comfortable component of that, pornography.
Right.
So this is going to go over really well. Really looking forward to this.
Yes.
Last time we had you on, though, we talked about your book, No Longer a Slave. You go through... It's basically your memoir, your addiction, your struggle, your victory over pornography. And even during pre-release and release of the book, there were already cool things that were happening for you, doors opening, opportunity for you to talk to people who were struggling. I think you might have even shared this on the podcast last time, but one man came to you, wasn't even attending church. He was just like, I'm struggling with this, and he asked for your help. So any update on any other new opportunities or just a cool testimony of something that's come from No Longer a Slave since then?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, man. Yeah, definitely seen God open some cool doors. My wife and I actually went on a national radio show, which was really cool.
Sweet.
We were able to share our story of, obviously my journey, but then, her journey as my wife. So that was really cool. And I would say probably one of the neatest testimonies. This is one of those unexpected things, but I was speaking at a church actually on a Sunday morning, and there was a man who was in the sound booth working the sound, and he reached out to me afterward. He said, "Man, here I am running the sound in the service. I've got to hold it together because I'm serving." And he said, "Man, I'm back there just like wanting to break down and bawl because I've been struggling with porn for 5 years.
Yeah.
My wife has no clue. And I'm just hearing your story, and I'm like, yes, me too. And he said, man, I went and told my wife that very day. He goes, I went and told my pastor. The following weekend, I met with my men's group, and I told all them. He goes, man, I just feel such freedom to get this out in the open. I don't feel the weight of my secrecy. And it was just really cool, man. It's like right there, in a Sunday morning, just by me sharing my story, it emboldened him to go and get help and reach out and quit living in secrecy. And so that was really cool. And, and he reached out to me and just said, man, like, thank you for having the courage, like, to put all your junk out there, because it's made me feel a lot more comfortable. Being open with my own struggle. And so, man, I mean, and, podcasts and speaking opportunities, a lot of cool doors opening, like in recovery ministry, which is really cool. There's obviously a lot of need for freedom in those settings. And so it's been really neat, man. God has really done some cool stuff with it. So thank you for asking.
That's cool. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that doors have opened, that you've had the opportunity to just really minister and help other people, because that's a real issue, especially in our world today, and which is why I wanted to talk about it as part of having this conversation with our kids, because as tragic as I think it is, I'm of the opinion, the more I think about it, that it is inevitable that at some point our kids are going to get exposed to pornography. That our kids might even willfully go and look at pornography. I mean, it's everywhere.
Right.
We talked about this last time, your story, and this is not to date you, but you talk about magazines. There were magazines around when I was still. I had people who had magazines and friends who had magazines. But I just had, the early workings of Google when things really started for me.
Right.
And now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just readily available.
Well, if I can interject, I've joked before. I mean, and obviously it's not really funny, but I mean, people will appreciate the lighthearted nature of it. But I've joked that when I was growing up, like, if you wanted to look at porn, like, you had to work for it.
Yeah.
You had to get on your bike and drive to your friend's house and wait till his parents were gone, and then sneak into his parents' bedroom and find his dad's stash of Playboys or whatever. It was effort. It was work.
Yeah.
And now, because of the explosion of digital technology and the accessibility of this whole world of, pornography available at literally the click of a button. I mean, it's right there,
exactly.
A world of evil in their pockets if they have access to it. And so it's unfortunate, but I think you're right. I mean, it's almost like them being exposed to profanity. I mean, it's like they're going to hear things, they're going to see things, and then even platforms now that are not distinctly pornographic, but are kind of gateways. There's enough tantalizing content that it piques curiosity and makes someone it funnels a good word. It makes someone curious to the point that they begin to explore, and then inevitably they find themselves on those platforms. And so you're spot on, man. And I think it's a good thing that you're having the conversation.
Well, I'm glad you're here to talk about it, because again, you've struggled with it, you've battled it. You're not alone in that.
Yeah,
I have too. And so it's probably, what did you say last time? Something like, was it 90% of men struggle with pornography and the other 10% are lying, or something like that?
So that's the stat. 90% struggle and 10%, the other 10% are lying. That
exactly.
So saying they don't.
It's not like we're coming to this conversation completely blameless, which I think adds a layer of difficulty that at some point in this conversation I want to address. But
sure.
Let's start here. Since the likelihood is near certain that our kids are going to get exposed to it, when we start having this conversation with our kids about sex and sexuality, what's the approach when it comes to pornography? Should we be proactive, or should we wait until something happens and be responsive?
Yeah. I think that you're going to get differing opinions on that. My personal belief on that is I think a proactive approach is always the best one.
Okay.
And I have two kids, and the way I parent them is very different because they're different. Their temperaments. I mean, I have a daughter, I have a son, so there's a lot of nuance to parenting.
Yep.
So, I always like to underscore that, some of the principles and things that I prescribe. I get that there's a uniqueness to each situation, but I think as a general rule, being proactive is ideal because you want to frame the narrative before someone else does.
That's good.
And one of the things that I say to parents, I actually said this in our church this last Sunday. I said someone is going to give your kids a worldview. They're going to give them a set of beliefs, a set of principles. And so, are your kids hearing it from their peers? Are they seeing it on TikTok or Instagram? Where and how are they getting their view, their blueprint, if you will, for sexuality? It's going to come from someone.
That's good.
And so I think the best way to frame that is to do it proactively and to do it from a place where you so help them know what is real and what is authentic that they can easily identify what's counterfeit. So I have a friend of mine who used to work at a bank, and she said, from time to time, people would try to come in using counterfeit money. But the way they trained them, it was really interesting. They didn't train them, say, hey, we want you to study all these different types of counterfeit bills, and this is a counterfeit 100, What they did was they had them spend hours and hours and hours studying and memorizing what an authentic $100 bill looked like. So they became so familiar with all the things to look for that made it genuine and made it real, that when something was false, even if it was just a little detail, they could easily spot it.
Yeah.
And I think that same approach is important, is that we frame it in here's what's real, here's what's good, here's God's design. And I think to pull out the awkwardness and the shame of like, hey, we can talk about this. I think this, for a lot of parents, they feel, I get it. They feel that sense of discomfort.
Yeah.
But again, you have to tell yourself, they're going to hear about it. I agree with you. They're going to hear about it. Do I want to be reactive when they've already seen something, when someone's already come to them? And we know that the age of exposure is getting lower and lower.
Oh, yeah.
They have a friend who found something, comes to school and says, guess what I saw? And then now they have no point of reference, so they're just taking in what has been sold to them.
Exactly.
So I think the more proactive we can be, in a general sense, it's better.
Now I agree with you that it's a case by case thing with kids, for sure. All kids are different. Some kids are going to need the conversation to start sooner. Some I think you can hold off on a little bit. But like you said, like my son's 8 and we're making plans already.
Yeah. My boy will be 8 next month.
Yeah. Like we're already having plans. We've already talked about stuff. Like he knows the correct anatomical names. Like we sat down the other day and I quizzed him. I said, buddy, because he made a joke about something. It was just me and him. And I said, do you know what those are actually called? And he was like, no. And I was like, they're called testes. And then we went through the whole deal of things. Yeah. And we explained it. Yeah. And he's like, okay, yeah, got it. So, to your point on the shame thing, one of the good takeaways that I got when I talked to Dr. Danny Werta, and this was big for me, not just in this conversation, but everything. He said, we have to feel shame about this conversation. He said, but shame started because of sin. He said, Adam and Eve were naked and they felt no shame. Yeah. They sinned and then they knew they were naked and then they covered it up.
That's good.
And so he was just like, we've been redeemed. We ought not approach this with shame.
Yeah.
Like, we can go and we can have this conversation.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So when it comes to being proactive about pornography, what does that actually look like? Do we break down in a sense and try to define what pornography is? Do we give some sort of cautionary warning to our kids? Like, you might have friends that try to show you A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. What do you think that looks like? Yeah,
man. And this is a great question because you and I are in similar seasons that so my daughter is 16.
Okay.
And so the way we've approached those conversations with her has been very different, than I'm, kind of like you said, I'm kind of laying the groundwork with my son.
Yeah.
But I think it's important, and I would encourage your listeners to be self-aware and self-educated that this is not just a young man's issue anymore, that this is something young ladies deal with.
That's
All
correct.
the data that we're seeing that's emerging is saying that in some cases as many as 30 to even 50% of teenage girls have acknowledged that pornography is a struggle for them. It's a very real issue because they've just been raised and have grown up in this digital age.
Yeah.
And so, man, I would answer that question with saying I think there's almost a prerequisite for having the conversation. Like that conversation has to be rooted in relational equity.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is I think when your child knows mom or dad loves me, mom or dad is spending time with me, and you're just in the rhythm and the habit of having just real life conversations, I think what it does is it kind of brings down the barriers, the barrier of awkwardness or the barrier, kind of like you said, that taboo, shameful, whatever, that we ought not feel as Christians, right?
Correct.
But I think you have to factor in the level of age appropriateness. So now with my daughter being 16, I can talk with her in a much more candid way because she's older, right? Whereas with my boy, I want to say enough that there's an understanding, but it's a fine line there where sometimes you have to contextualize, like his little mind, can he understand? Can he process? And so I think you can use language that is specific enough that it connotes what you're trying to relay to them. You can say things like, dirty pictures or things like, you may see, like we've said things like, for example, in a different context, we've told him, no one should ever touch you where your clothes cover you. Like if your clothes, and we told my daughter the same thing when she was growing up. Hey, your clothes cover your chest. They cover, your privates. Like anything that covers you, no one should ever touch you there. And so you can use simple language like that, and in like fashion, say, hey, you should never like pictures that show where your clothing. Like, man, that's not like. Those are not good pictures, And I think that you have to know your child. But where I would encourage the listeners is to have this conversation without any kind of relational equity is going to be incredibly challenging, if not impossible. I would say pursue your kids, know them, spend time with them. So when you're having these conversations, it doesn't feel like such a, we have to have this big talk. It just feels like an everyday moment.
Right.
But language that is specific enough, and I think the parents know for their kids, but like I know with us, that's just an example. We've talked about clothing that covers you, but then to even talk to them about, how this is not bad. It's not that our bodies are bad. It's not that sex is bad. And I think that's important too.
Yes.
And then I think even if someone has already been exposed, I think this is critical, is delineating between, hey, this doesn't mean you may have made a poor choice, but that sense of shame that comes with sexual sin. Yeah. And Paul talks about that in Corinthians. He who sins sexually sins against himself. That's the weight of sexual sin. I think being able to talk to your child in a way that if they have been exposed, they still feel that safety to come to you, because a lot of times that sense of shame is so immense that they feel like, man, I can't talk about this. Right. And so I think vulnerability, relational equity, and the language that is honest enough that it gets the message across, but not, I'm not going to tell my 7-year-old son, something so graphic or extreme. For sure. Whereas with my 16-year-old daughter, maybe graphic's not the best word, but you know what I mean? Yeah. More explicit as far as just the level of detail. Right. And so I think your kids, and you have to use wisdom there.
No, I think that's good. I like your analogy of, don't let anyone touch you where your clothes cover you. I think it's really important for kids, especially younger, 7, 8 years old. Yeah. Kids don't think in abstract. They think in concrete.
Very absolute terms.
You have to make it very 100%. Plain for them. So
that's good.
To your point, using language that they're going to understand, giving them an analogy that they can hold on to. Yeah. I think that's a very good point.
Well, and we've even like my wife and I've talked, that like we'll even say things like, it's okay for mommy and daddy to see each other with our clothes off because we're married. And that's the way God created it. Yeah. Like we always start with like, again, what is the real thing? So we can spot the counterfeit. Yeah. And it's not, we'll say that's the way God created it, that a man, the only one who should see him naked is his wife, or a woman should be her husband. We're not supposed to see other people that way. And so, like you said, and I think that's an excellent point, is kids do have a very rigid black and white understanding. And so you have to spell that out. But I think simple, but clear enough and thorough enough that it gets the message across is the key.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I'll reemphasize what you said. The idea. So I like the focus on the authentic thing. I like that a lot. But kind of like tying into that, focusing on the good in them and that they're not bad, that it's not shameful, that their body is in any way shameful, or that they've made a bad choice, but that doesn't mean that they're ruined. Reinforcing that.
I love you.
Yes.
Yeah, you're not taking this issue and tethering it to their sense of identity or their sense of, just their very self-image. Because that's the thing about sexual sin, and pornography in particular, is it has a way of, it goes from looking at something dirty to like, I am dirty. And that, you know what I mean? Because, and let's be honest, this is just real talk here. Do we understand that this is illicit? Do we understand this is outside of what God desires? Yes. Can we recognize it still has an appeal to it? Yeah. We still have a sexual drive. We have a sinful nature. And so when you're exposed to something like that, and on the one hand, it's wrong, but on the other hand, you're like, I like this. Yeah. I like to look at that. That can send messaging that's like, oh man, I've been told this is wrong, this is dirty, but I like it. Does that mean I'm dirty?
Sure.
And to be able to come alongside your kids and say, hey, this is a normal desire.
Yeah.
You're not, I love you. You're not, and to let them distinguish and delineate between their identity versus their decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical, man, because I know just in my journey, man, I absorbed that shame immediately, which is one of the reasons I'm like, I'm not going to tell anyone about this. Yeah. I felt dirty. I felt unworthy to ask for help. And that, again, that goes back to that relational equity. You've got to be a safe place for your kids to talk.
Yeah.
And if they feel like they can talk to you about anything, then pornography won't be an exception.
Yeah, I think that's good. The relational equity needs to be something I think we drive home.
Sure.
Just because even with what I talk about in the podcast, I always talk about, from the missional perspective of we're raising disciples as Christian fathers, that if we're going to be able to do that and have the influence in their life to accomplish that, then we have to have relationship.
Sure.
Without relationship, you have no influence, and then you're going to fail in the mission.
Yeah.
This is still a part of raising disciples.
Sure.
Like it falls under the umbrella. It's a small part.
Yeah.
And it might be bigger in our generation than it was way back when. But it's still a component of, how do I navigate this? Because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
You walk around the mall, you're going to see some stuff you don't need to see.
Yes.
You're on the computer, you even play games. People talked about getting little ads on games, and it's just like, well, why is that even coming up? It's everywhere. Again, kids are going to see it. But
and I think that's where, again, I want to give kudos to you, because I think parents are what I would call willfully ignorant to think that their children won't be, at some degree. They may not see a hardcore pornographic scene, but, they're going to be exposed to some level of, we just live in a very sensual culture, even our music, our commercials. I was just watching TV the other day, and the program I was watching ended. And this next show starts. I couldn't even tell you the name of the show, but it starts, and there's literally two women kissing. And I'm talking primetime television, and it's on, and I'm like, what in the world?
Yeah.
Like, not that long ago, this would have been considered pornographic. Correct. This wasn't like 11 o'clock at night. This was like 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
This has become normal. And so if you're not having these conversations, like, and dude, I'll be honest, man, I tore into our parents pretty good this last Sunday, not in anger, but I just told the moms and dads, I said, if you've made the decision to give your children smart devices and you've not put content filter on those devices, I looked at the room, I said, what in the world are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
You might as well hand them a loaded handgun and be like, try to be careful.
Right.
Like the danger, of that level of accessibility. So I'm with you, man. We have to talk about it. It is a part of Christian discipleship and spiritual formation.
For sure.
Yeah.
I want to just pigtail off of what you just talked about. How far do we go when we shelter our kids? So yes to the mobile devices and yes to some security around internet usage or whatever. But I think about my exposure to pornography was like, I want to say it was like third grade.
Mm-hmm.
The buddy of mine, Google was out, and he was like, dude, did you know that you could Google and tell it, like, show me somebody naked or whatever?
Yeah.
And this is disgusting, but I'm going to share it. The first thing he ever even tried to look at was Hillary Clinton's boobs. And that's what he typed into Google. And while nothing of her popped up, other things did. And so, like, this is first exposure for me. It happened with a buddy of mine. So I'm thinking, well, then how far should we go to shelter our kids? Should we have a policy to where our kids don't get to stay the night with anybody because God only knows what that kid might be able to do, that the parents,
right.
It might not appear that way, but
yeah,
maybe that's the case. How far do you think we go?
Yeah, well, I will tell you. Well, first off, I could have gone all day without thinking about Hillary Clinton's boobs.
You're welcome.
But thank you. But in all seriousness, I think the world has changed, and I know there's a school of thought that would probably say, man, sleepovers, like those are, that's just part of being a kid, part of growing up. But I think the world has changed. And I think for us as a family, I can only speak for my wife and I, like we've allowed my daughter on a handful of occasions to do sleepovers when she was much, much older. I mean, she was well up and we had already had these conversations. But I think as a general rule, man, the days of where you would just crash at someone's house, I would really caution parents. Like we even take it a step further. Like my son plays with a lot of kids on our street, and we have been emphatic. I've been very assertive in my vocal tone, where I've told him, I said, "Don't you ever go in anyone's house. Yeah. I don't want you in their house." And, well, Dad, why not? I said, well, a couple reasons. But I said, number one, you need to be playing outside. It's a pretty day. You need to be outside. You don't need to be in their house. But what I know is he can be in there. He's alone with a kid, and I don't know what he's looking at. I don't know what these parents have in the home. Right. And there's even been situations where one of the kids on our street, he'll sometimes come down with a tablet that has a data plan. And he's looking at YouTube and stuff. Right out in the street, and I don't know. And my son's been asking me, Dad, can I get YouTube? I said, no. Yeah. And he's, he keeps asking these questions. And so, we can't isolate our kid. They live in the real world. Right. I think we can do a disservice to isolate them to the point that they don't know what they're stepping into. That's good. But for me personally, man, I don't see my son having a sleepover anytime soon. Yeah. And it would have to be, if I could give a caveat, it would have to be someone that we knew extremely well. Yeah. Extremely well. And the child would have to be, obviously a family of faith is it paramount to us. So like in my daughter's situation, we literally had this level of honesty. Like, if anything makes you uncomfortable, you call us. Even though we knew them, strong Christian family, he's very involved in church and all that. I said, if he's looking at you, if you have if anything, whatever, I said, you let us know. Like, you call us, we'll come get you. Yeah. But I can literally count on one hand the time, and she's 16. I can count on, and it was with one friend. Yeah. So that's been very rare because we did know the family. But I know you've heard the stories, man, of people that, oh man, we thought we could trust them, even in the church. Yeah. And it's crazy. It's crazy that we have to live that way. But I would rather err on the side of being too conservative, for sure, as opposed to being too trusting. Yeah. And with that, I understand some people think, well, you're just being, I'm like, well, maybe I am, but I'd rather be too conservative, And I'm not saying let's all be Amish, right? You can't. There
is an extreme.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But my understanding from what I see in the world is, man, we can't be too protective of our kids when it comes to that area.
For sure. Yeah. And I think there's ways that we can mitigate the seriousness, at least in the eyes of our kids, right? Sure. So like one of the things that we did, we had a kid in our old neighborhood. He wanted my son to go into his house all the time. And I was just like, no, I don't know his parents. Mm-hmm. Said it's not going to happen. Right. it's just not an option. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I said, he's welcome to come into our house if
There
his
you go.
parents are okay with it.
Yeah.
And so like that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. And make your house the house the kids want to come to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we open it up that way, or it's just like, we can't do this, but we'll set a play date. Like we'll take you to the park on a weekend, and you and your buddies can play for hours on end.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to their parents, maybe get to know them. Maybe we'll just, we'll figure it out.
Sure.
Right. So
Yeah. No, that's wisdom.
I think we can get away from the constant sleepovers by doing other things.
Yeah. And I think, like even with my son, I think what you're saying is so good that, rather than making it this heavy, like we don't ever go in anyone's house, have I been very direct and assertive? I have. But even with that, I've used it as a teaching moment. I'm like, listen, we don't know their parents. We don't know what's in the house.
Yeah.
And it's just better. It's safer. And I'll even say things like, son, if you got hurt in there, like I don't want to put them in a situation, it's just better if you're outside. The sun is shining. It's a pretty day. You need to, man, you're a little boy. You need to be playing, and we've encouraged him to view, like outdoor playing as a treat. Like, look how pretty it is today. Yeah. Remember when it was cold and you wanted to go outside? Like, why would you want to be inside? And just to reframe it. But it's interesting because there's a couple kids down there and they'll play together. And this was actually a teaching moment just literally last night. As we were asking, I said, I noticed I haven't seen the one kid as much lately. Where is he? He goes, oh, he's inside and he's playing on it. He's like gaming or something, but he's always gaming. I said, see, son, those devices, they have a way of sucking you in. I said, look how pretty it is outside. Y'all are having fun. You're jumping on the trampoline. And he's in there staring at a TV playing, and I'll say, that's why phones and devices, I'm like, these have a way of consuming you. I said, we're just not going to let you do that. And then even with my daughter, I mean, she'll be 17 in October.
Yeah.
We don't allow her to have social media. And some parents may think, well, that's a bit much. I'm like, I disagree. And I'll go so far as to say, no, I think you're wrong.
That's what the experts recommend.
That's exactly what the experts are saying of how detrimental social media is.
Yeah.
And my daughter, and I give my wife the bulk of the credit for this, is just an incredibly balanced, healthy, godly young lady.
It's awesome.
And I think because she's not been living and swimming in those waters of constant comparison and being inundated with images and sounds. And I just think we have to be wise.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. I think that's really smart. That reminded me of something very funny. My wife took the kids just the other night and read a bit of research to them about screen time and how the recommendation is like no more than 2 hours a day. Like absolute.
And that's all screens.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so my son, he's very much once he learns something, he's on board.
He gets it.
And so he was like, okay, I got it. I understand. So he's at school the other day, and a lot of the learning and work that they do at school sometimes is on a laptop or a tablet or something. And he goes to his teacher and he says, Miss Teacher.
I know where this is going.
He said, Miss Teacher, I've been doing this for 2 hours and you want me to spend another hour? He said, did you know that it's recommended that kids don't have more than 2 hours of screen time?
He is.
The best part
yeah.
is that she didn't even argue with him. She was like, then you go write a story about whatever you want to on piece of paper. And he was like, you got it. I was just like, wow.
That's awesome.
My wife told me that story, and I just died laughing because I was like, what a little boss. This kid just went up.
Using the data to his advantage. I love it. Yeah.
It's like, man.
Hey, I've peaked out on my screen time for today.
I know. It's like, sorry, if I want to do anything later, I'm maxed out already. I'm sorry.
That's hilarious.
It was fantastic.
That's great.
It was fantastic. All right. So the sheltering thing, I think is important. Even with that, though, I still think that there's going to be exposure at some point, and I think it's going to come through peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
I think about my story, and maybe I'm biased to it, but only reason it was ever unveiled to me is because one friend, right?
Sure.
And then that opens the whole thing, and then everyone else is, tapped into it a little bit, and someone makes one joke, and then other people laugh, and they realize, okay, this is comfortable to talk about in this group.
Yeah.
And then one thing leads to another, and you're like, yeah, I watched this, and then it's just
Yeah.
And then you feel like the sense of validation, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody does it.
Yeah.
And
you're
feel
almost
okay.
well, you're not almost. You are. You're the weirdo or the oddball if you're not. Like, what do you mean you don't?
Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly. And so I think that peer pressure is something that we're going to have to deal with. I even think about it in terms of, again, my son. He's come home and he's like, yeah, so-and-so said the F word. I'm like, what's the F word? And he told me. And I was just like, okay, yeah, that's it. And I told my wife, I was like, let me go get dinner with him tonight so we can talk about things.
There you go.
And we did. I mean, I took him to Taco Bell of all places because I didn't think a lot of people would be there. And I was right. Because when I asked him one more time, he just said it pretty much this loud. And I was like, God bless America.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
So
son, we don't have to tell the whole restaurant.
It's like, okay, they already know it, buddy.
Yeah.
It's me and
but
you.
See, I think you're onto something critical there. Is you're already establishing, like, hey, you heard this in our home, man, as followers of Jesus. We understand this is not what God wants.
Right.
You heard it. Hey, son, you just told me what you heard. I'm not mad at you.
Right.
I'm not upset with you. And I think that, again, and I keep using this term, that relational equity. Like, kudos to you, man, for, hey, we're going to break off, go have some guy time at Taco Bell.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to use this as a teaching moment. And I think that's where, unfortunately, a lot of parents, and this is a whole other rabbit trail, but just so many parents are not involved with their kids. They're not connected.
Right.
We ourselves are on screens. We ourselves are working crazy hours. And sometimes it's just easier, to not make time and to do those things. And I think you have to be very intentional. And so I think that's great that you use that as a teaching moment, but how you separated, like, what he heard, what he even repeated to you versus who he is and how you feel about him. And I think that is going to embolden him in the future. Like,
right.
Hey, Dad, someone showed me something. Wait, all right. Well, sounds like it's time to go to Taco Bell.
Let's go check it out.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like because and I hate this. Is because as much as I hate to admit it, I think you're right. They're going to be exposed to something, and we've said that. But I think. We try to be as proactive as we can be on the front end, and then I think even that reaction to that is so critical, because if we freak out and you saw what you did, like man, that initial response is either going to endear them to us or it's going to cause them to distance themselves.
Exactly.
So I think I know I keep saying it, but I'm telling you, they're only going to be as honest as they feel safe.
Yeah, that's really good. And to the point of relational equity, I think this is not something that we come to late in the game. It's just like, okay, I'm getting ready to talk about sex and pornography is going to get ready to come up. Now I need to be intentional as a dad.
Yes.
This is when they're young.
Yes.
Like if you've messed up and you weren't there, just don't live in regret and shame that you missed it. Just start right now, right? Like now's the time to get started because it's the little conversations like this.
Huge.
Like, all right, Dad, I heard this cuss word. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's the word. Like 100%. You win a trophy for this one, but let's just talk about it. Here's why we don't talk this way.
Yeah.
Here's why we choose to talk the way that we do.
Yeah.
Nothing's wrong with you, but I don't use that word. Your mom doesn't use the word. No one in your life uses that word.
Yeah.
And this is why. It starts with little moments like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're even smaller than that. And just like,
it doesn't take a lot.
He hits his sister, but you don't need to do that. Here's why.
Yeah.
Okay. But freaking out and just like rage disciplining, like the old school, like, I'm not to a place, and this is totally off topic. I'm not to a place where I'm totally like anti-spanking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not there yet, but I cannot remember the last time I did it in my house.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to think if my goal is to disciple my kids, then how does that disciple them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like there's got to be more to it.
Yeah.
Like it can never be a standalone act of discipline.
Right.
It has always got to be accompanied with something.
Sure.
And oftentimes that accompaniment, that conversation can do away with the spanking in general. Right. So I'm not on the bandwagon yet.
I got you.
But that's just where it falls, because we've got to talk to the kids about things, because communication is building trust.
And you take 10 seconds and spank your kid and you feel like, okay, well, I've checked the box of parenting them, but have they learned anything other than, okay, they may have learned like this action produces this consequence, but do they understand why? Do they understand your heart in it? Do they understand that this correction? What does Hebrews say? Hebrews 12. He who the Lord loves, he disciplines, and that the discipline is the evidence of our sonship, that we belong to Him.
Correct.
And so there has to be more there. And I'll tell you something. This may be a little off topic. I don't think so.
Go for it.
But something I've been doing is, I will get on Airbnb and I'll dig around and I'll try to find some relatively, like $100.
Yeah.
Like little overnight stays. And so like my daughter, a couple of weeks ago, she had a game down in East Texas. She plays soccer for her high school. And they have the option to ride the bus or to ride with a parent. And it was a 2-hour drive down there. So I told her, I said, hey, it's a Friday night. After your game, why don't we get a cabin? Mm-hmm. So we got a cabin in Lindale, and we're driving in my truck and we're talking, we're having the best time, and we get this cabin, and then we're going and sharing meals, and we're talking about life. Hey, how's school going? Like, I'm pursuing her heart.
Yeah.
I want to know her. This coming weekend, my son and I found a little Airbnb. It's really cool. It's this old retrofitted gas station that has a 9-hole putt-putt course in the backyard.
That's
like
awesome.
A little kid's heaven, right?
Yeah.
And so, but what am I doing when we're riding to the place, when we're sharing meals, when we're back there? I'm talking to him. Yep. I'm pursuing his heart. I want him to know Dad loves you. I'm in your life and I'm present. And I think a lot of times when we have this conversation on pornography, we don't realize that, it would be like if we were having a conversation on gardening. It's like we can talk about seeds and watering all day, but if you don't got good soil that you're planting into,
that's good.
Who cares?
Yeah.
And as moms and dads, we got to till up that soil through the relationship. So when we plant these seeds, man, they take root, Yeah. And so I know that I'm driving that home, but I'm just telling you, I think too many parents don't understand that connection of you've got to pursue your kid's heart.
Right. No, and I 100% agree with you. Hey, if you're a new dad or choosing to embark on a fresh start as a father, I have a gift for you. I wrote a book a while back called Cut the Crap, Direct Tips for Becoming a Dad. I don't teach you how to change a diaper. That one's totally on you. But I do talk about 5 elements that you need to focus on as a dad if you want to be the dad your children need you to be. Now, this is completely free. It is yours. There's no strings attached. The only thing that I'd like you to consider is if the book brings value to you as a father, make a contribution by going to fatheringourfuture.com/support. But you don't have to. Again, it is a free gift from me to you. The link is in the description after the end of the episode. Click it, get your copy, and I pray that it helps you. You brought this up just a moment ago, and this is kind of in the same vein that we're talking about. In the event that we catch our kid in the act, whether we find something on their phone because we just looked at their phone, whether we catch them engaging with pornography in the moment, how should we respond?
Yeah.
In the moment. I know, like, that's like heat of the battle. That's just like, holy crap, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, I know, like, that's the initial, but one thing that I always like to talk about is in those moments, I always take a pause and I think to myself, how do I disciple my kid this moment?
Sure.
So as we pause and think, how do I disciple in this moment? What do you think that looks like?
Yeah. Well, let me say first, I'm going to be answering this question hypothetically because by God's grace, that hasn't happened yet.
Yep.
Although my son is young and I mentally have had to consider that a moment like that could happen.
Yep.
I will say I think there's a difference between, and you've probably heard this, a reaction versus a response.
For sure.
We can't control our immediate reaction in terms of what we feel, what we think. Reactions are kind of like reflexes, right? They're involuntary.
Yep.
But I will say, I think the way we choose to respond, we can absolutely control that. And I like what you said there. Sometimes we have to pause and think through and say, okay, my immediate reaction is to maybe get angry, to lash out, or what are you doing? Whatever. I think, again, answering this hypothetically, but putting myself in that situation as someone who struggled with it, I think that is probably one of the most fertile teaching moments of, in the same way if you caught a child using drugs or drinking alcohol, it's a moment to lean in, again, to affirm who they are as your child. I think that the ingredient of identity is so important, of saying, listen, I get it. This stuff is, I know everyone's doing it. I know This seems harmless. I know it seems pleasurable. All those things, everything you're feeling is normal. These are normal temptations. But I'm telling you, here are the dangers, here are the pitfalls. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a consequence necessarily, but I think if I were in that situation personally, man, I think conveying a level of just ruthless, like ferocious love. And when you talk about discipleship, I mean, like that is a teaching moment. And so let's change the context. When you look at probably the biggest failure in all of the Bible, Simon Peter denying Jesus, how did Jesus respond? Well, Jesus pursued him.
Right.
They're fishing. Jesus comes to the shore, calls them in, cooks some breakfast, right? They're talking, and he goes back to him, hey, do you love me?
Yeah.
Do you love me? Do you love me? And Jesus initiated the moment. He says, man, I called you to be my disciple. You're still my disciple.
Right.
Man, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. Like the calling was there. The affirmation was there. He initiated the moment. It wasn't this, you screwed up, I'm done with you. And I think what we're aiming at in this moment has to be bigger than this moment.
Yeah.
We have to zoom out and think, what is my goal long term?
Right.
And so now, if my kid, what if they get exposed again? The way I react now is going to determine the way they interact with me later on.
Correct.
Are they going to be vulnerable? Are they going to open up? Are they going to come to me and say, man, Dad, I shouldn't have done this.
Yeah.
And something I tell my kids all the time, I say, listen, even when you mess up, you can always talk to me.
Yep.
Even when you know you did wrong, I love you. And you know what? Daddy made a lot of mistakes growing up. You know what? I'm here. And my love for you has nothing to do with what you do or don't do. I love you because you're mine.
That's right.
And so again, what are we doing? We're separating the behavior, not call it sin, not to confront it, not to speak to the evils of it. Of course we're doing that. But here we go again. We're doing it in the context of relationship.
Yeah.
Because there's no discipleship without relationship.
Correct.
You just can't do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really good. Let's take that pause. I'm thinking back to when I was 12 or 13. I wasn't even at my house. I was at somebody else's house, and they had a computer in the room that I stayed in, and that man swung that door open so fast. I don't know. I want to say.
And you got caught?
I want to say that it was by the grace of God, even though that's probably not what it was. But the reflex and the speed I had to hit the tiny little X in the browser was unbelievable.
Wow.
He was not
so
able
you were
to,
that close.
Oh my goodness. I was terrified.
Yeah.
But he slams the door open. What are you doing? And I don't know if he was just trying to be funny to scare me and then realized, because had he walked into the room, he would have seen a whole lot more than he wanted to see, if you know what I mean. And I was just like, it's so.
Well, I'm sure your face was, at a minimum, some anxiety or something. Even if nothing's on the screen, he's looking. He's like, "What's going on here?"
You're just staring at the desktop and all the applications.
Yeah.
I was just really like this color blue.
Yeah. I wanted to see what all programs you had on your desktop.
Right.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
So, but again, like to the point, like when that is the response, it's just there is more fear, there is more secrecy, and the shame is increased, and this is wrong. Like this is really wrong.
Yeah.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't let people know that I do this.
Yeah.
And then so you never get to the recovery element of overcoming it because you're just trying to deal with it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't want other people to know.
And that's what the enemy wants. He wants to isolate you. He wants to, you've heard it, and I probably said it even last time I was here. We're only as sick as our secrets. Yeah. That, I don't know who even coined that phrase, but it's so good. And you're exactly right. It's that level of secrecy that pornographic struggles thrive in. Right. It gets its grip on us, and we can't tell people. And that's what I always go back, and this is kind of a more recent part of my own journey. But as you really study the Gospels and you study the way Jesus interacts with his disciples, and failure is never this moment of just utter catastrophic, like, oh, you're done, and there's correction, there's rebuke, but then there's always a renewal of the relationship and a security of the relationship. Right. And it's interesting because I think if people could understand, and particularly us as parents, can transmit this to our children. Like I love one of the things Matt Chandler says is that God's commands are invitations into life and joy. That when we talk to our kids, it's not that we're so much just calling them away from something, we're inviting them into something better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and that
it's
goes
good.
back to the counterfeit and the authentic of, God has a plan. It's awesome. And especially as your kids get older, like, no, sex is not dirty. Sex is like, I think Christians ought to be, to your point on the shame came after the sin, but we have to understand this is not a bad thing. This is something the enemy has taken and distorted.
Right.
And if we can help our kids understand, God loves you so much, I love you. Hey, buddy, this is not what God has. I promise this will mess you up. And but man, what a challenging thing this is for parents, because it's hard to convince a 12, 13-year-old that what they're seeing on the screen and everything about it feels right and feels good to tell them, hey, this is not God's best for you.
Right.
This is actually not going to lead to your flourishing. They're like, no, this is pretty awesome.
That feels pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but that's where I think not a reaction, but a response is so critical.
That's good.
And you just have to keep doing it over and over and over.
But again, driving the nail into the coffin here, the relational equity.
Yes.
Like that's
So
what it
vital.
is. Like if you're communicating, they feel safe with you, you're building and cultivating trust and just continually compounding that. And if you're like, hey, like I get how it feels. It's great.
Yeah.
But you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
I think if you continue to work on that relationship, those words have so much more weight. And then to the point you were talking, and it reminded me, as far as the disciplinary side of things, Christ didn't come into the world to condemn the world. Why the heck would we have that approach?
Yeah.
Why would condemnation then be a part of our tactic as a parent?
Yeah.
Correction for sure.
Yeah.
But to bring the shame and the condemnation with it,
Yeah.
I think maybe that's a part where some before us maybe missed it a little bit.
I think they thought that was a good motivator.
For sure.
And
it was
to
some extent.
But see, here's the thing. Here's the thing I've learned. And I can say this as someone who's grown up in church my whole life. I'll be 47 in a few weeks, right? And as someone who grew up in the church, what I have learned is when religion is the driving force, when it's this appearance of things, what you find is that people become masterful at modifying their behavior. And so, I learned to, in certain settings, I modify my behavior to fit in with the context that I'm in. And so what I have said, and it's interesting, we just went through this with our church, but I said, our goal is not behavioral, like outward modification. The goal is inward transformation. We actually want to change who we are from the inside out. And I think that's the difference, is religion starts from the outside in.
Sure.
That somehow if I just quit doing this, it'll work its way into my heart. And when you look in like the book of Ezekiel, the messianic promise of, I'm going to take your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh.
Right.
Like I'm actually going to give you a heart that desires something different, something better. And I think that that's so vital for us to recognize, is the goal is to not just get our kids to not look at porn. The goal is to get them to love Jesus and desire his pathway for their life, and to trust that his plan is better. And I think it's important too that we be honest, because we can talk to our kids, especially when they're mature enough to say, listen, hey buddy, it tempts me too. It tempts me too. But you know what? I can simultaneously be tempted by something and also at the same time trust that God has something better.
Right.
So we're not denying the temptation aspect. And I think, I'll be honest, man, and maybe some people will disagree with this, and that's fine. But when like I would hear people like men, like when I was growing up talk about porn, like, oh, that's so disgusting and that's so whatever. And I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Really? You think a beautiful woman is disgusting?
Right.
And even now, it's like you want to time travel and say, you're being religious right now. You don't really feel that way. You're saying the right thing because you're in this setting.
Right.
If you just would be honest, you would recognize in your sinful nature, this is appealing to you. So rather than crafting this like religious narrative of, oh, we don't whatever, it's like, man, just be honest about it. Of course it appeals to us.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, what does Paul say? Man, yeah, it's sin living in me. Romans chapter 7, it's not me, it's sin living in me. But it's so vital. And even in my own life, bro, I've talked with my daughter because she's old enough to understand. She knows, man, her dad has a broken history of sexual sin. I've been very honest with her.
Yeah.
Why do I do that? Because she knows, man, Dad gets it. Dad has had his own struggles. I'm not going to say anything that's going to shock Dad. I can talk to him. And I think that's another thing is people, dude, this is crazy, bro. I actually had a church cancel a speaking. This happened a week ago. I had a church cancel a speaking engagement with me because they heard about my book. True story, man.
Wow.
And I'll be honest, it hurt me. It hurt me deeply.
Yeah.
But this church is basically like, man, they don't want to go there type thing. And I'm like shaking my head. I'm like, okay, well, if you want to stick your head in the sand and pretend this is not an issue, I'm not mad at you. You're still my brothers in Christ, but wow, man, this is crazy that you don't want to go there.
I think that's sad. And it's sad that it happened to you directly. It's sad on a bigger scale because when the church is unwilling to address sex and things like that, then it's the people who venture out into that territory on their own without any instruction.
And it's people
or whatever.
in the church. That's the biggest irony. Is I'm like, you're thinking this is an issue outside of the church. No, this is happening here, and that's another thing. Let's talk about it so we can help dads and help moms and help kids and people that are in our own, sitting in our own pews in our buildings on Sunday morning that would be so grateful to know, man, this is a safe place. Yeah. And then maybe this sparks conversations between parents and their kids, And so, it's so vital that we just be honest about it, and not pretend. It's like any alcoholic I've ever met. They'll say, yeah, man, I love whiskey. It tastes good to me, but I know it's not good for me. Right. Could I drink some right now and enjoy the taste? Yeah, but I don't like what it's going to do to me. I don't like where it's going to take me. Yeah, I think that's the approach we need to take with pornography. Yeah, we're not denying its pull on us. Yeah, we're just saying, man, God's got something better.
Exactly, and that honestly for me, that was the biggest thing. It was just like, you know what? There is zero value that I get out of this. Like, there's a moment, but what value comes with it? Yeah. Nothing. I'm like,
but all the guilt,
exactly,
shame, depression,
you get a bunch of
anxiety.
Exactly.
It's not a good trade-off.
But what benefit comes from this? Yeah. And it's just like, it's meaningless. That's what you get out of it.
It's like Solomon talking about that chasing the wind, right? Yeah. Chasing something you're never catching. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I get it, man.
Wow. Okay. No, I think that's really good. I want to ask you something in relation to that, but I think I want to ask you one other thing first, just to see your take on this. Stepping back a ways, knowing that there's a good chance that exposure comes through peer pressure. Mm-hmm. Are there things maybe that you have tried to do with your kids, or things that you would recommend to help kids, even at a young age, maybe start to set boundaries to where they're so sure of who they are and what they're doing that when one kid says, hey, come look at this with me, they're like, no, I'd rather not. For me, it was fear. And I don't say this to be like derogatory toward my parents in any way, but like I never tasted alcohol. I never did drugs. I never did anything like that for the sole purpose of I was told that it was wrong. Mm-hmm. That's all I needed. Yeah. Maybe you're kind
of like your son. Once you lock in, you got it.
Maybe that makes me a little bit of an outlier because when people were like, yeah, you should do this, I'm like, I don't do that. I don't want to do that.
No desire.
It was never. I'll be honest with you. On a cruise a few years back, whatever island we stopped at, there was a free tequila tasting thing. And I was like, you know what? I've never tasted alcohol at all. I said, I will try it. It was a very small thing. And the guy's talking about tequila and how it's so big where they're at and it's the drink of choice. And he was like, make sure you breathe the right way when you drink it. Because I was like, I've never had any alcohol before ever. Right. So I took a drink and he was like, what do you think? I said, why on earth would anyone drink this? So he was like, he felt so attacked because he's like, my entire culture drinks this. I'm like, this is awful. I was like, so I was like, again, not only common for me, I was like, I never have any desire there. But when it comes to setting boundaries with kids, maybe this ties back to relational equity, but is there anything outside of that you could think of here's how we can help the kids just be confident in who they are and what we've instructed them to do?
Yeah, I think So this may or may not answer your question, but maybe in part it will. One of the things I do with my son, I take him to school every morning.
Okay.
I'm a big believer, moms and dads, wherever we can be involved, let's be involved.
Yes.
So I've just chosen 5 days a week, every morning I take him to school. 2 days a week I pick him up. And so what I try to do is leverage those little 10, 15-minute windows.
Yep.
So one of the things I do is literally every morning when I'm dropping him off. So like this morning, I'm dropping him off, and we're pulling up in the carpool line, and as I'm letting him out, I ask him 3 questions. And so I'll ask him first. I say, "What is your name?" And he says, "Elijah Baker." "And who are you?" He says, "I'm a man of God." I said, "What are you going to do today?" "I'm going to live for Jesus." We do that every day.
Wow.
So what I'm hoping is happening is just through that repetition of just those deposits every day.
Yeah.
It is building a sense of identity. Now, I don't think that can supplant pragmatic conversations as far as, "Hey son, listen, if someone ever says, 'Hey, I want to show you something,' and I'll be honest with you, man, that's not a specific conversation we've had, but I think going into those scenarios, just like we did, for example, with the, 'Hey, no one should ever try to touch you or your clothes cover you.' Mm-hmm. That's a scenario we're preparing them for on the front end. As you're describing in that's actually kind of planting like something's firing off in my mind. I'm like, you know what? I need to have that scenario conversation with my kids, specifically my boy being so young of, hey, someone may say, 'Hey, I want to show you something on a phone.' If they do, ask them this, well, what is it? Is it bad, or is it, what are you going to, no, I'm not going to do that. What if someone, and this happened to me, I remember being a freshman in high school, and there was a group of guys gathered around someone's locker, and they're just all kind of huddled, and I was like, what are they doing? And I remember I just walked up and peeked over a dude's shoulder. They're standing right there in the hallway with a dirty magazine. I mean, I just instantly saw it. And so there was no warning. It was just bam. And as you've said, there's a great likelihood that will happen. I think having those conversations in a hypothetical sense prepares them and gives them the tools. Okay, I'm in this moment. Oh yeah, Dad talked to me about here's what I do. Yeah. And so I think the more we can prepare them is good. But to your point on identity, I think, and I don't like how this word has been hijacked, but the word affirmation, affirming who they are. And I think there's an extreme. You can take anything to an unhealthy extreme. Sure. So now we have people that are affirming things that are just, it's like, this is just who you are. And it's like, that there's no need to modify or change anything. You just affirm your default setting. Right. And now what I want to do is I want to call out who God says he is. And I want to affirm that and reinforce it. And I just think the more someone knows who they are, like I heard, I think it was Levi Lusko said this. He says, when you know who you are, it doesn't matter who you're not. And that resonated so strongly with me. And that can mean a lot of different things. But it's like, well, you're not cool, then you're not, fine, whatever. I don't care. Right. I know who I am. I don't need your applause. I don't need you clicking the like button on my life for me to be somebody. Yeah. I know who I am. And I think the more, especially as dads, I mean, I'm not saying that the moms don't play a huge role in identity. They absolutely do. But we know this, man. There's something about the voice of a father for sure speaking into their children and affirming their identity. The mom brings kind of the nurturing and the love, whereas, the dads, we bring that sense of identity and like, here's who you are. And I think the hypothetical going through the scenarios is good, but man, that identity is huge.
No, I think you're right.
And I like what you said about how, you were always told like, man, this is I never did that because my parents talked to me about it. I mean, there's power in that when we talk to our kids, having those conversations.
Yeah, no, I think I like the drive on identity. I like the exercise that you do where it's a verbal thing every morning.
Day. Every single day.
I think that's powerful because repetition is everything.
Yeah.
I think in ways we've been able to do that with little things with our kids. Again, kind of focusing like what you said at the very beginning on what's authentic, focusing on the good rather than always bringing out the bad and trying to point out all the negatives. Yeah. I think we've done a pretty good job with that with our kids. I mean, I think about my son, even my daughter Reagan now, but they, even with like things like picking out their clothes, like sometimes their choice of outfit is just like, okay, it's a little odd, but But and they
you realize
never,
we're going in public, right?
and they never question it. They never think anything about. They're like, I'm comfortable. I like this shirt.
Yeah.
I like these shorts. I like this pair of pants. These shoes are awesome. I don't care they don't match.
Yeah.
I feel good, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
you feel good. You're good.
Yeah.
You do your thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, even in like little ways like that, just
letting them know that, hey, what you're doing is okay.
Yeah.
I'm affirming your choices. I'm affirming your ability to make decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that does give them confidence. And man, this will sound funny, but we know for all your listeners in Texas, we joke how, the old saying, if you don't like the weather, just wait a little bit. It's always, like it was like 80 something 2 days ago. And then of course today we're
40.
Rain. Freezing. Yeah. So last night we had a fire going in our fireplace. Now I love fireplaces, and it's just my thing. But the fire was getting low, and I looked at my boy and I said, hey, go put another log on the fire. And he goes, can I do that? I said, of course you can do that.
Yeah.
I said, go put a log on the fire. And so he goes over, and as he's doing it, I said, now listen, push it towards the back. I said, and I'm kind of talking him through it, but I never got out of my recliner. I don't know if that's good parenting or being lazy. I don't know, but man, I could see, it's funny. So actually, forgive me, that was 2 nights ago.
Okay.
So he does that. So then last night, check this out. He goes, hey Dad, the fire's getting low. Do you want me to put a log on the fire?
Yeah.
So he went from being unsure to whereas now it's like, oh, I can do this.
I can do it.
And I think in the same way, if we can build that sense of identity, like, son, you can live a pure life. You don't have to be like everyone else. You don't have to have a secret porn habit.
Yeah.
And if you stumble, if you struggle, man, Dad's here. I love you. I'll help you. But man, that sense of knowing who he is. And again, when you know who you are, it doesn't matter who you're not. You don't need the voice of all your friends telling you who you are, because my Father on earth and my Father in heaven's already instilled that into me.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's super powerful.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question because I think this is probably the big struggle for most of us as fathers when it comes to the topic of pornography and having the sex and sexuality conversation with our kid. And that is that we've messed up. Like, we've messed up with pornography. We're not blameless.
Gotcha.
It's one thing to approach this and be like, you know what? I'm an expert on this. Like, I know I equate this to growing up in church, and a lot of times the sermons were directed to people like, you don't want to have sex before marriage. You don't need to drink alcohol. You don't need to smoke or do drugs. And I was the kid. I never did any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Struggled with pornography, but I wasn't trying to make babies with anybody.
Yeah.
And so those sermons, they would always tell me like, and if you don't have that testimony, that's great, because there's still a testimony in that you remain pure, on and on and on. And so like, you get the validity kind of like, okay, this is a good thing that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to this conversation with our kids, I'm thinking, well, I'm not blameless.
Yeah.
So now it's a little bit of a different thing, like to tell someone like, don't do this, don't do this. But
I know I did, but you don't.
Didn't you do that, Dad?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And so can you maybe speak to that, to where there's this sense of like, I am guilty of this.
Sure.
Like, I have messed up. How am I qualified to be the one to tell my kids, don't do what I did?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, and probably one a lot of parents wrestle with, particularly dads, this issue. So I think to some degree, we need to roll this weight off of ourselves, because again, back to Romans 7. I mean, even the Apostle Paul, as he's writing, 13 books in our New Testament, you read in the latter part of Romans chapter 7, and Paul readily concedes. He says something really profound. He says, there's the good stuff I want to do, I don't always do it.
That's right.
And then there's the stuff over here I shouldn't do, and I find myself doing it. So in writing his admonishments, his encouragement, his rebukes to all these different churches, even the Apostle Paul recognized that he wasn't batting 1,000. And so I think to some degree, it's like, for us to have this, well, I can only correct someone if I'm completely flawless. Well, then the only person who'll ever talk to them is Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? All of us have some level of struggle. But what I say is, rather than letting that limit you, leverage that. And so that's what I've had to do. I mean, I've had to talk with my daughter now, who's older, and my son. These conversations are coming as he gets older. But my daughter knows that Dad was very broken in this area. She knows I made a lot of mistakes. She knows I was promiscuous, that I struggled with porn, that I got I had to resign from the first church where I served because of moral failure. Even though I didn't get caught, I came forward, but I disqualified myself from ministry. I don't hide those things from her because I look at it like there's no benefit in pretending to be something, like that. Oh, Dad's always been this perfect. No, I haven't. That's just not true. And I think in the Bible we learn in a couple of different ways. We see the example of Joseph, who fled sexual temptation, and we see the example of David, who didn't. And we can look at David, who got it wrong. And there are so many, like I'm reading through 2 Samuel right now, who got it wrong, and you see the fallout of his sin. And so I think our mistakes in our past can be incredible teaching opportunities, to say, hey, listen, I'm speaking to this as someone who understands it. There's almost a level of like, don't tell me I don't understand this. I absolutely do.
Yeah.
But if I love you and I know the damage this has caused me, of course I'm going to speak into it. Son, I love you. To your girl, I love you. I don't want you to go down this path. In the same way that if someone rolled up their sleeve and had all the scars where they had been in heroin addict, like I've got scars that, like this is where I have been and this is what it caused me. Like, why would I not warn you and caution you? Hey, I wish I could tell you do what Dad did and never struggle with it. That's not my story, but I hope you have a better story than mine. I don't want you to have my story. I want you to have a better, and I understand the struggle, but at some degree, it's like, well, do you tell your kids not to lie? Well, have you lied? Well, yeah. Why do you tell them not to? I mean, it's like, how far do you take that?
Good. That's
you know what I mean? Like,
that's a good point.
I mean, at some level, none of us, but it's like Maya Angelou said, when you know better, do better.
Yeah.
And when we know better, that's the loving thing to do. And so we're not teaching them from a platform. See, again, this is religion. You need to be like me.
Right.
You need to do what I do. What are we doing? We're pointing them to a God. It says, man, I didn't trust God. I rebelled against him. I thought I was smarter than God. And you know what? It hurt me. It messed me up. And I don't want that for you because I love you. So we're not hiding from it. We're actually, I told people, take all those things that the enemy has tried to use to shame you and flip them on their head and use them as teaching moments. Like, hey, the enemy used this to destroy me. And I'm going to use this. Like I heard a guy say one time, my friend Aaron Frizzell, I'm going to make my pain pay me back.
Yeah.
I'm going to get something beneficial out of all this junk that happened to me. It's going to now pay me back and serve some good purpose in my life. And I'm going to use this to help the next generation.
That's awesome.
Help my son or daughter. Yeah, man.
Yeah, I just was writing this down while you were saying that. Don't allow shame to keep you silent.
Yeah, well, that's good. I like that.
And I think that's a good thing, because we do feel shame about, I'm not looking forward to the day to where this comes up with my kid. I'm like, buddy, I struggled with this too.
Sure.
Like you never want to admit the faults. Like you want to be the all-star superstar. I always did it right, Dad.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important for us to realize that if we are always so good, then we are unattainable. And we are not something that they'll follow. They'll choose something else.
You nailed it.
Because they can't be us.
Unattainable and unapproachable.
Yeah.
I can't talk to Dad. He's never struggled. And that's been my experience, man. Like the guy at the church that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Sitting in the sound booth and he's like, oh, wow, this guy's talking about it. And then he feels like now he can.
Right.
I think for me as a dad, I've never had any desire, maybe because it's never been an option for me, but I've never had any desire for my kids to look at, oh man, my dad is perfect. I love that my kids know, man, dad's story's a little bit rough, but you know what? He's in a better place. Look at what he's doing. He's pastoring a church. Like my wife and I, next month, we'll celebrate 20 years of marriage.
Congrats.
I mean, there's a lot of blessings, and so they can see. And so I think sometimes as parents, we put this pressure that the only way we have, again, equity is if we've done it perfectly. No, man, the Bible is filled with stories of what not to do.
Exactly.
I mean, thank God for the Josephs. Thank God for the Davids. I mean, you can look at David and be like, ooh, man, wow, okay, that opened up a can of worms.
That was a man after God's own heart.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
And God said that about him, right? So God called him this. It's like, wow, but do you know what I mean? I follow you. Parents put this weight on themselves. Well, if I struggle with it, I did it, so I can't say anything. No, absolutely you can, because you've been through it. Yeah. That's a great question, man. I like that.
No, I think that's good. Let's close with this because you wrote the book on it. For dads who might be in the place where they're like, you know what, this is going to be a hard conversation for me because I still struggle.
Hmm.
To the dad still struggling with pornography, what guidance do you speak to him?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that whether it's pornography or any issue, pride, anger, like there's not a dad on the planet who's not fighting some battle.
Yeah.
The only alternative is that you've fully arrived in your sanctification journey and you're perfect. And so what I would remind every dad of is that God is always and only used imperfect vessels.
Yeah.
I would challenge him to really look in the mirror and say, how much longer do I want this to be my story? How much longer do I want to wrestle with this? And all the things you and I have talked about being a safe place for our kids to come to us. They need to find that safe place where they have someone come alongside them, someone in that situation, just like we don't want our kids to live in secrecy. Man, dads, if that's your struggle, again, I'll speak this over the men. That's not your identity.
Yeah.
You may be participating in something that is not your identity. And it's possible, to be a son of the king, but to live like a slave or a servant. You can live a different life.
Sure.
But when you know your identity and you know who you are, it gives you the capacity to change and to be freed up. And so I would say to those men, like, man, get the help you need, you know, and even as you're bringing hope and healing to your kids, just know that like there's grace for you and hope and healing for your own journey. And I understand when someone says like, how do I help my child in this if I'm struggling with it myself? But again, I don't know that any of us have arrived at this place where there's not something, that
Sure.
We're battling or we're growing in. But, I would say take your own medicine. If you're offering this advice to your kids, man, say, you know what, I need to go get in a faith-based recovery program, or I need to pick up the phone and call somebody like the guy at the church. Told his wife, told his pastor, told his men's group, and has messaged me, says, man, like I didn't even know this was possible to live this way, because he'd been so afraid of reaching out.
Yeah.
And so I would say take that step and realize just because you've been there doesn't mean you have to stay there. And just know that God has only ever used broken people.
Right.
And so, don't let what you struggle with keep you from being the father that you need to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's good. To the point, you just ended there with God always using broken people. It's very easy to look through the Bible and to read people's stories, and then to have these moments where like, man, I want to be faithful like Abraham, or I want to be a leader like Moses, or I want to be like so-and-so. All of these people were ordinary, broken people. The common thread is that there's an extraordinary God behind every single one of them.
And isn't it funny? You mentioned Abraham, the father of faith, and yet what did he do a lot? Lied.
Yeah.
David, a man after God's own heart, and yet he struggles with lust and adultery. Noah gets drunk right after, you can go down the list, and and yet these are men that the Bible celebrates, not as you said, not because of who they were, but because of who God transformed them to become. Yeah. And that's the key. It's not who we are, it's who we're becoming.
Exactly. And all that in the midst of their frailty and brokenness. Yeah. Like God still uses them. So there's hope for you. There's hope for us.
Yeah, man.
All of us as dads, we have hope.
100%.
So get the help that you need, because you have help to give to your children. I would also highly recommend No Longer a Slave by my friend here, Hadley Baker.
Thank you.
They can get that. Do you still have HadleyBaker.com?
Yeah, HadleyBaker.com. They can just go on Amazon
as well.
Yeah, Amazon, No Longer a Slave. And it's actually, I'm really excited to announce, since I was with you last, it's now available on audio.
Nice.
So if somebody wants to jump on Audible and check it out there. I know some people I've talked to, they're like, dude, I love you. I want to support you, but I don't read. Yeah. They go, I'll listen, but I don't read. I'm like, I get it.
There you go.
So it's available in audio as well.
Now everyone can fully love and support you and just listen to it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, man.
Well, go check that out. I'm going to ask you to do this as we wrap things up. Just close in a word of prayer, and then we'll call it a day.
Sounds good, man. Let's pray.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we come to you in Jesus' name, and we thank you first and foremost that you have adopted us, that we don't have a spirit of fear, that we are slaves, but Lord, we cry out to you, Abba, Father. And Lord, as you father us, we can father our sons and daughters. So I pray that before we ever try to teach our kids what it is to be fathered by us, Lord, that we understand and learn what it is to be fathered by you. And I pray for myself, Lord. I pray for everyone watching, Lord. I pray for all of us that you would just help us, God, to grow and to become the men that we need to be, that we can lead by our example, lead through our story and our testimony. Lord, that where we've dropped the ball, we can own it and leverage that. And Lord, where you've, in your grace, given us the ability to do things right, we can teach from that place. But Lord, we just thank you that even though none of us are perfect, none of us are batting 1,000 at this fathering thing, that Lord, as we've said, you only use broken people. You only use guys who struggle. That's the only kind you've ever used. And Lord, we will be no exception. So I pray for the man today who is struggling, who feels defeated or discouraged, or maybe the dad who's just been unsure of himself, how to approach all of this. Lord, come alongside them in a profound way. Give them grace, give them boldness. And we pray, Lord, that they would leave a legacy of purity, a legacy of faith and devotion to you. And Lord, even as we struggle and stumble, Lord, we thank you that you fill in the gaps where we fall short and that we can pass on faith to our sons and daughters. So we just thank you, Lord, that you are strong in our weakness and that you lead us forward, God, into this journey. Lord, as we father the future, Lord, we know it's an important role you've given us. And so we say yes to step up to the plate and to be the dad you've called us to be. Help us, Lord. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again for being with me.
My pleasure, man.
This was a good conversation. So much good came out of this. And I know it's going to be a blessing for me. It's going to be a blessing to everyone who's listened. Again, no longer a slave, hadleybaker.com or Amazon. Get the audio, and you can listen to it while you drive, and you can knock it out real fast and get the help that you need. But if you need help on this fatherhood journey, know that you're not alone. I'm here with you. You can reach me, fatheringourfuture@gmail.com, and I'll help you however I can. And if I can't, maybe I can get you in contact with people who can. But know that you're a difference maker, a dynasty builder. You're a dad. Be all in on this thing called fatherhood. Stay faithful. You can do this. This is Fathering Our Future. I'm Anthony Vandegrift. Thank you so much for being with me, and I hope you'll join me next time. Hey, one more time, I want to thank you for listening to Fathering Our Future. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever you listen and consider leaving a nice review because I would appreciate that. But if you're not connected to Fathering Our Future on social media, you can find it on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and there you're going to get some additional content on a more regular basis that you don't always get here on the podcast. Now, the last thing that I would like to ask of you is that you would consider becoming a financial partner of Fathering Our Future, because dads make a difference, and dads are not disposable. Dads are vital, and they are essential, and they are needed. And the impact that dads make doesn't just reside in the home, but it has a ripple effect that goes to churches and communities and culture. And I'm inviting you to be a part of equipping and empowering and educating dads to be the dad that God has called them to be and that their children need them to be. You can become a financial partner with Fathering Our Future. It can be a one-time contribution, a monthly commitment, but by doing that, you play a direct role in impacting dads. You can check the link in the description below. You can pray about it. You can get on board. And I thank you in advance for becoming a part of Fathering Our Future in a special and a dynamic way. God bless you.